My name is Catherine Holloway. I'm 69 years old. I was a nurse for 42 of them. ICU, trauma, geriatrics. You name it, I've worked it. I trained 3 generations of younger nurses, taught them how to lift the dying with dignity, how to hold hands during the last breath. I never thought I'd be the one crawling across a tile floor, bleeding and ignored by the very people I raised. She dropped the pills again, Claire hissed behind me. We're not her nurses, Owen. I froze. The words sliced sharper than the fresh wound on my hip. I had been trying to get up, slowly, carefully, from the couch when the pill bottle slipped from my fingers and scattered across the floor. Blood spotted through the gauze beneath my nightgown. My legs still felt like cooked noodles. It had only been 7 days since the hip replacement surgery. I reached out, slow, shaky, and caught myself on the coffee table. Claire and Owen were in the kitchen. I could see their shadows through the frosted glass. They didn't come, not even when I whimpered. She's doing it on purpose, Claire snapped. She wants us to feel bad. Emotional blackmail. Don't, Owen muttered. Don't start. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Instead, I gritted my teeth and lowered myself onto my elbows. My hands trembled as I reached for the bottle. One pill rolled under the cabinet, another toward the dining chair. I shuffled across the floor like a ghost with bones. I could feel the stitches tug at my side. Still, they didn't come. They were my son and daughter-in-law, my only family left. And they looked at me, like a burden. I had delivered him with these same hands, rocked him through fever, stayed up through every college application night while his father drank himself numb in the garage. I never asked for help, never demanded anything until now. Now, when I truly couldn't walk. I had trained nurses to care for strangers with more compassion than this. I used to say, the first rule of nursing is to see the person, not the condition. But Claire, who once smiled at me over mashed potatoes, saw only a nuisance now. And Owen, my son, my baby boy, had said nothing. My fingertips finally touched the bottle. I pulled it toward me. The floor was cold. My hip throbbed. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I looked at the phone on the coffee table, a few inches away. I let out a slow breath and reached. The screen lit up in my hand. There were only 2 numbers I needed. One for the bank, one for the lawyer. I didn't flinch, didn't shout, didn't announce anything. I just dialed. First, I called the bank. Yes, this is Catherine Holloway. Please lock all accounts immediately. Yes, all disbursements. Effective now. Then I called Mr. Silverman. Hi, I need that clause activated. The one about the deed transfer. Give them 48 hours to vacate. I looked at the door to the kitchen. Still no one came. They didn't know what I'd just done. They thought I was still crawling. Let them. My name is Catherine Holloway. I was a nurse. I am a mother. And today, 7 days after surgery, I stood up. Not on my feet, but in a way they'll never forget. I held the phone with both hands. My fingers trembled a little. Not from fear, not anymore, but from the raw ache that comes after you finally decide you've had enough. I looked toward the kitchen. They were still arguing about dinner, like I wasn't inches away from bleeding through the gauze. They forgot to change. Like I hadn't raised him, like I didn't even exist. I had 2 calls to make, just 2, and after that, there'd be a before and an after. The first number was muscle memory, the bank. Hi, this is Catherine Holloway. I need to freeze all accounts I co-hold with Owen Holloway. The woman on the line paused. I'm confirming your identity, ma'am. That won't be a problem. I answered every question with calm precision. Social security, verification phrase, old address. I could still recite them even if I had just scraped myself off the floor. I want all auto debits stopped, all joint cards frozen. I'll be coming in next week to restructure access entirely. May I ask if something has happened? The voice asked gently. I looked at the corner of my sock, still damp with blood. I smiled faintly. Yes, I said. I woke up. Call ended. That was the first. It took less than 5 minutes. But it was enough to cut off the gas, the weekly grocery fund, the cable, and their gym memberships. Everything they'd casually routed through my retirement checks like it was God-given. Let me be clear. This wasn't revenge. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply turning off the faucet. I wasn't a nurse anymore. I wasn't a patient. Today, I was the one giving the orders. The second call was to Mr. Silverman, the lawyer I'd trusted since the day my husband died. He picked up on the first ring. Catherine, how's recovery? Eye-opening, I replied. I need to activate the clause we discussed, the property title, the clause about occupancy rights. I want them out. Effective when? Now, but put 48 hours on the paperwork. Send it to both emails, and a physical copy too. There was a pause. You sure? I didn't answer for a moment. The tile beneath me had gone cold, and the weight of what I was doing settled over me. Not like a burden, but like a warm coat I hadn't worn in years. I'm sure, I finally said. They left me on the floor. I'm not angry, just done. He didn't ask more. He knew me better than that. We'll have it drafted and delivered within the hour, he said. And Catherine, I'm proud of you. After we hung up, I placed the phone back on the table. In the distance, I heard Claire's laughter. She probably peed herself again, she said under her breath. Owen chuckled. That was when the line broke. Inside me. The last time I laughed with my son, we were watching It's a Wonderful Life one Christmas Eve. He'd cried when Clarence got his wings. I had cupped his face and said, always choose kindness, even when it's not returned. I had forgotten to tell him, kindness doesn't mean servitude. They saw me as a wallet with legs, a guilt-ridden woman too soft to ever say no. But today, I wasn't the one crawling anymore. I leaned back slowly against the couch and exhaled. My breathing steadied. My mind did too. Somewhere in this house were framed photos of Owen graduating med school. He'd dropped out before finishing. Still blamed me for pressuring him. I didn't argue. I just kept paying the bills. But this wasn't about tuition, or groceries, or rides to the airport. It was about dignity. Mine. And today, I reclaimed it. Not by screaming, not by fighting, but by quietly drawing a line. One call to the bank, one call to the lawyer, and a lifetime of self-erasure began to dissolve. I wasn't a nurse. I wasn't a patient. I wasn't a charity. I was Catherine Holloway. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one writing the chart. I didn't always live in silence. There was a time my house echoed with piano practice, late-night study sessions, and the deep, tired laughter of a woman who was holding her world together with threads and prayer. It started the day my husband, Edward, passed. A cardiac arrest. Sudden, brutal, unforgiving. Owen was 15. I still remember the look in his eyes when the paramedics left. He wasn't crying. He just looked small, as if he already knew the weight that would now fall on my shoulders. Or worse, on his. I buried Edward in the blue suit we'd picked out for his retirement party, the one he never made it to. The next morning, I folded up every piece of myself and got to work. 3 shifts a day, 16 hours in scrubs. Every wound I cleaned at the hospital, I carried in my bones when I returned home. I kept a pot of stew on the stove for Owen, taught him how to iron his shirts, left notes in his lunchbox until he got old enough to find them embarrassing. And when the tuition bills started coming in, I did what I had to do. I mortgaged the house. I remember signing those papers like I was signing a part of myself away. The counselor said, "You sure, Mrs. Holloway?" I smiled. "He's got a shot. I'm not letting it slip through because I was afraid of a second mortgage." We sold the antique chest first, then the china cabinet, then my wedding porcelain. All except one piece. A single teacup, white porcelain with a faded gold rim and a thin hairline crack that ran like lightning from the lip to the base. It wasn't the most beautiful one, not the rarest, but it was the one Edward and I used the night we first moved in. We sat on the floor of this very house, surrounded by unopened boxes, drinking chamomile and dreaming of what we'd become. That cup stayed. Even when I sold the dining set, even when I wrapped each saucer and dish in newspaper and handed them off to a stranger, even when the kitchen looked empty and Owen asked, "Why keep that one, Mom?" Because some things aren't for using, they're for remembering. That cup sat in my bedroom window for years. On rainy nights, I'd hold it gently in both hands, not to drink from it, but to feel something that hadn't left me yet. Back then, Owen would come home from school and drop his backpack by the door. "Hey, Ma," he'd say. I'd hug him even if I smelled like antiseptic and sweat. He was kind, thoughtful. He'd boil water for my feet when they ached. He'd sit next to me at the table, pretend to study while I snuck in cat naps between shifts. I once walked 5 miles home after a double shift because the bus broke down and I didn't have $12 to spare for a cab. But I smiled the entire way, holding a rejection letter from a scholarship in one hand and Owen's report card in the other. Straight A's. I thought, this is worth it. This is everything. I carried that hope like oxygen. Every stitch I sewed into his future was stitched with faith that he would remember, that maybe one day, when my bones grew old and my steps slowed, he would hold me the way I held him. But people forget, especially the ones you raise to believe they're entitled to the sun. I had nothing for years. No weekends, no friends, no savings, no insurance after Edward. But I had purpose. And that porcelain teacup, still sitting there, still cracked, much like me, delicate but unbroken. When I held it last night after those phone calls, I noticed the crack had grown longer. Time does that to porcelain. And to women. But what time couldn't do was erase the woman who fought tooth and nail through every silent night, every missed meal, every shift on her feet, to build a future for someone who now called her a burden. Number Time wouldn't take that from me. Neither would they. Because even if I was down to one teacup, one working hip, and one breath of dignity left, I'd spend it wisely. Not to beg, but to remember. I still remember the first time Owen brought Claire home. She was composed, poised, her blouse tucked in just right, not a hair out of place. She smiled when I opened the door, but her eyes were like scalpels, sharp, assessing, cutting through everything with clean, clinical precision. I thought, she's impressive. She's going to make him stronger. Back then, I was still working long shifts. I had laugh lines etched into my face, arthritis blossoming in my knuckles, and that teacup still sat by the window, catching the light like it too, was waiting for something new. Claire took off her shoes at the door without being asked. She folded her hands in her lap and complimented my stew, though she only had 2 spoonfuls. When Owen left the room to take a phone call, she turned to me and said, "He talks about you a lot. It's clear he owes you everything." I smiled, warmed by the words, but even then I could feel the pause, the subtle chill behind her compliment, like a warning wrapped in sugar. Still, I tried. Good heavens, I tried. I gave her the family recipe for cornbread, handwritten, stained with decades of use. I offered to alter her wedding dress when she said she didn't like how it fit off the rack. I even stepped back during the ceremony, letting her mother sit next to Owen during the vows. It's her day, I told myself. Let her shine. But after the wedding, something shifted. The phone calls stopped. The hi mom texts turned into Catherine. Dinners were planned and forgotten. And when I offered to help with the housewarming party, Claire said, "Actually, we'd prefer to keep it small. Just our friends." I stood in the kitchen that night, wrapping the banana bread I'd baked into foil. They never came by to pick it up. I'd given her space, grace, support. But I began to realize I was standing outside the home I helped build. I was the one who helped Owen write his first college essay, the one who held his feverish body through childhood nights, the one who worked 3 shifts so he could stand proudly at that altar. But I was no longer part of the picture frame on their mantle. Just a faded outline where something used to be. Still, I convinced myself I had to try harder, that maybe if I was kind enough, helpful enough, invisible enough, they'd find room for me again. I cleaned their gutters when they left for Tahoe one Christmas, babysat their neighbor's dog when theirs didn't arrive on time, even paid for Claire's dental surgery when Owen's insurance didn't cover it. Never once asked for thanks. Because that's what we do, isn't it? Mothers, we love without receipts. But with every act of kindness, they moved farther away. As if the more I gave, the less I mattered. Kindness, it seemed, became a quiet kind of crime in Claire's world, an intrusion, an inconvenience. One night, I left a pie on their porch, pecan, Owen's favorite. The next morning, I found it in the trash, unopened, smashed. There's a moment when your heart doesn't break. It rearranges itself, and that was mine. I had once dreamed of a daughter-in-law who would laugh with me over burnt cookies, who'd ask about Owen's childhood, who'd one day hand me a baby with the same sleepy smile his father had. Instead, I got Claire, the perfect daughter-in-law to someone else's mother. To me, she was a boundary, a locked door. Still, I kept trying, because somewhere inside, I held on to the belief that goodness always finds its way home, that if I poured enough love into the cracks, one day, something would bloom. But love doesn't always get returned. Sometimes it evaporates, quiet and unseen. And what no one tells you is this: being too kind, in the wrong hands, becomes a liability. Something to be used or discarded. I wasn't her enemy, but I was never her ally. And the saddest part? I kept thinking, if I just held on a little longer, they'd see me. They'd come back. But I was a candle burning at both ends, in a room where no one noticed the light. That was the day I stopped leaving pies and started watching, listening, learning. Because even mothers, even the kindest ones, must one day learn to stop knocking on doors that will never open. The first time I saw the house, It took my breath away. Cream shutters, a wraparound porch. Light poured through the tall windows like it had been designed for Sunday mornings and blueberry pancakes. "This is it, Mom," Owen said, his arm wrapped proudly around Claire's waist. "This is the one." We stood in the gravel driveway, and Claire held the real estate brochure like it was a map to the life she always believed she deserved. At the time, they were just a little short on the down payment. Not much, just enough to lock the dream behind a closed door. Owen was working a startup job with irregular pay, and Claire was in between marketing contracts. So they came to me. I didn't hesitate. I had a retirement bond that had just matured. I cashed it quietly, wrote the check, and handed it over with a kiss on the cheek. But Claire said, "We want you on the title just to help us qualify. It'll make the loan process smoother. You won't have to worry about anything. We'll take care of it all. It's just paperwork." I smiled. She was always so composed when she asked for things. Not a hint of entitlement, just matter-of-fact efficiency. That made it feel less like a favor, more like a formality. So I signed. Of course I signed. What mother wouldn't? It was never about ownership for me. It was about helping them build a future, helping them build a home. They moved in that spring. I helped unpack boxes. I hung up their first set of curtains. Claire insisted on silk, not polyester. "Cheap fabric makes the whole house feel tired," she said, half laughing. I nodded, though my own curtains had been stitched by hand during my nursing school years. Cotton, fading, but still good. They hosted their first Thanksgiving that year. I brought my sweet potato casserole, the one Owen used to request on his birthday. Claire had made a rosemary turkey with lemon glaze and said, "We're going for a cleaner palate this year." My casserole stayed mostly untouched. So did I. Over the years, I started noticing the distance. Subtle at first. Claire would text instead of call. "Let us know before you drop by," she wrote once. "The baby's on a strict nap schedule." There was no baby yet. The house began to feel curated, sterile, like a magazine spread. Nothing out of place. No toys, no mismatched mugs, no throw blankets with memories. One day, I noticed the title had changed. Owen was still listed, but my name was gone. I asked Claire about it, gently, cautiously. She looked up from her tablet and said, "Oh, that. We refinanced 2 years ago. Didn't want to bother you with the paperwork. You said you didn't want to be involved financially anymore, remember?" I didn't remember saying that, but I remembered how my hands shook the day I signed the first papers and how no one asked when they were taken off. I said nothing. I just nodded. It was her way. Ownership, in her world, meant control. And control was something she never surrendered. Not even to kindness. Still, I tried to help. Once, after noticing how loose the stair railing had become, I brought my toolbox and offered to tighten the bolts. Claire appeared at the top of the stairs with a mug of tea and said, "Catherine, just leave it, okay? This isn't a nursing home. We're fine." I put the screwdriver back in my bag. That was the day I stopped offering. Funny, isn't it? You can pour your love into a house, a family, a dream. But love doesn't entitle you to a key. And eventually, the house you helped build becomes a stage where you're not even cast as background. It becomes the most beautiful home you're not allowed to grow old in. Even when I stayed the night, after Owen's surgery, or when they traveled, I'd sleep in the guest room without a closet. My things kept in a plastic bin marked Mom Seasonal. They had wine racks and indoor plants with their own irrigation schedule. but no drawer for me. It wasn't my home. Not really. Just a house with my fingerprints scrubbed from the walls. So when the lawyer asked me later, "Were you ever a resident?" I hesitated. And then I answered, "No. I was just a helper." And I meant it. Because sometimes you don't lose a home all at once. You lose it in pieces, through silence, through assumptions, through the quiet erasure of your name on a deed. It was the day after the surgery. The anesthesia had worn off, but a dull ache lingered in my lower back and legs, like my body wasn't quite sure if it wanted to heal or give up. I was still in the hospital room. White walls, buzzing monitors, the scent of bleach and overcooked carrots from the hallway trays, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe right. "Mom?" I froze. It was his voice, Owen's, but softer, almost boyish. The way he used to sound when he called from college, when his laptop crashed or when he'd forgotten how to wash his wool sweaters. "Hi, sweetheart," I managed. My throat was dry. I hadn't spoken all morning. The nurse had been in and out, wordless, mechanical. A press of morphine, a change of bandage, a tray left untouched. "I heard you're being discharged tomorrow," he said. "Claire told me." "That's right." There was a pause. I heard the sound of traffic in the background. Maybe he was in the car. Maybe he pulled over just to make this call. "Don't go back to your place," he said, and his voice cracked, just slightly. "Don't be alone. Come stay with us for a while. Claire's off work for 2 weeks." I blinked. Once, twice. Claire, off work, for 2 weeks. I pictured her face, the thin line of her lips, the carefully measured voice that could cut glass. I imagined her reading this script, nodding once. "Just 2 weeks. We can manage that." I didn't speak. I didn't know how. "I know it might be weird," he added, "but we've got the downstairs room cleared, and the bed's firm. You won't need to go upstairs at all." Downstairs room, the one that used to be Claire's office, the one where they stored the Christmas boxes, the broken treadmill, and a chair no one wanted. "It's just," he hesitated, "I don't want you by yourself, Mom. Not after surgery. You shouldn't have to do this alone." For a moment, my chest tightened, not from pain, from something far more unexpected. Warmth. Not blazing, not loud. Just a soft, tentative flicker, like someone cupping a match in a windstorm. "I appreciate that, Owen," I said, slow, careful. He exhaled, relief, as if he'd been bracing himself for rejection. "You're my mom," he said. "It's the least I can do." And there it was. You're my mom. Not the babysitter, not the backup ride when Claire's late, not the woman who folds our laundry because we don't do it right. Just Mom. For the first time in years, he'd said it like he meant it. Not out of obligation, not with an eye roll, but with something close to tenderness. "I don't know what the recovery will be like," I said, slowly. "There might be days I'll need help getting to the bathroom. Or cooking." "I'll help," he replied immediately. "We'll figure it out." I almost smiled. Not because I believed him fully, but because he sounded like the boy who used to bring me a glass of water with 2 straws, just to make it fun. "I'll need to bring some of my meds and the walker." "I'll be there with the car tomorrow morning," he said. "Don't worry about anything." Claire's name didn't come up again, but in my mind, I imagined her reaction when he told her. I imagined the pause, the calculation, the tension behind her temples as she forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And still, I said yes. Because beneath all the fear and exhaustion and history was hope. Not for a miracle, not for a movie ending, but for a moment. A moment where a son remembered his mother not as a fixture in his adult life, but as the woman who once walked 3 night shifts in a row just to keep him in private school. The woman who patched his soccer socks and held his science fair volcano when he was too nervous to walk. The woman who, even now, still wanted to believe he could be kind. As I hung up, I let the phone rest gently on my chest. Outside, a bird called somewhere near the window inside. My fingers brushed the nurse call button, but I didn't press it. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel entirely alone. The first morning back at Owen and Claire's house, I woke up alone in the downstairs room. There were no footsteps, no voices, only the hum of the refrigerator down the hall and a faint draft under the door that whispered like an unwanted guest. My walker leaned against the nightstand, right where the nurse had helped me place it during discharge. Claire had barely spoken at the hospital. She'd signed the release forms quickly, eyes on her phone. Her smile never quite landed in her eyes. Owen had carried my small bag in. "You'll be fine here, Mom," he'd said, patting the armrest. "Claire even cleaned this room for you." I wanted to ask, did you? Or did she? And what did it cost her smile to do it? But I kept quiet. On the nightstand was a paper schedule, times typed in 12-point Arial, printed without ceremony. Pain meds at 8 a.m. and 2 p.m., antibiotics at noon, bowel softeners at night. Underneath, in Claire's handwriting, "Stick to this. Don't skip. I won't chase you." At 8:15, no one came. By 8:30, I used the walker to inch my way to the kitchen. The pills were laid out in a weekly plastic sorter beside a glass of room-temperature water. No note, no breakfast, just the silence of polite obligation. Claire came in 10 minutes later in her Peloton gear, glistening with sweat, earbuds in. She looked at me as if surprised I was standing. "You should have waited. What if you fell?" she said, opening the fridge. "I didn't want to be a bother." "You're recovering," she said flatly. "Not helpless." I nodded, unsure how to respond. That became the rhythm of the week. Day 2, reheated soup left on a tray. Day 3, Owen left at dawn for meetings, returned late, kissed the top of my head as if that counted as presents. Day 4, I asked for a second pillow. Claire blinked and said, "We're already out of clean ones, sorry." Day 5, no one remembered I had a follow-up call with the surgeon. I took it alone. Day 6, the heat in the downstairs unit stopped working. Claire told me to just bundle up a bit. Every day, I moved a little slower. Not from the surgery, but from the frost that began to settle around my ribs. There were no questions like, "Are you warm enough? Is the pain better today? Do you want some tea?" Just the sound of dishes, closed doors, a television muffled behind upstairs walls. That Friday night, I shuffled slowly into the living room just as Claire was stacking dishes into the dishwasher. "I noticed my pill schedule says 8 p.m. tonight too," I said softly. She didn't look up. "It's already on the tray." I didn't see it. She turned, her eyes sharp, voice clipped. "It's next to your water bottle, like every night." A silence stretched between us. "The kind that pinches more than it heals. I'm grateful you opened your home," I said carefully. Claire closed the dishwasher with a loud snap. Then she said it. Cold, precise, surgical. "You know, Catherine, maybe we should have talked about this. Honestly, you probably would have been better off in a rehab center. They have nurses, ramps, bedside buzzers. This house isn't built for that. We work, we're busy. I stood there, one socked foot inside the kitchen tile, the other still on carpet, like I hadn't yet entered the place fully, like I didn't belong on either side. I understand, I said, quieter than I meant. She softened, just slightly. It's not that we don't care, but this isn't a nursing home. I nodded, but the words stayed. This isn't a nursing home. As if caring for someone who raised the man she married was a burden to be managed, a temporary inconvenience, a checkbox to clear. Later, when I lay back in the too-firm bed with my knees propped on a rolled towel, I stared at the ceiling and counted every crack in the paint. One for every sacrifice, I thought. One for every night shift. Every skipped lunch to save tuition. Every time I told myself they'll see me if I just keep giving. I closed my eyes. Somewhere above, the floor creaked, Claire pacing, Owen maybe pouring himself a glass of something. No one came down. No one asked if I was in pain, or if the stairs had haunted me, or if the dream of being part of this family had slowly begun to turn cold in my hands. It was the morning of my 10th day in the house. The ache in my hip had settled into a dull, heavy throb. Not unbearable, but loud enough to remind me I was no longer 30, no longer a nurse in white sneakers briskly walking from bed to bed. I was now the one moving inch by inch. And I had to go to the bathroom. Claire had left for an early errand. Owen was still asleep upstairs. And I told myself I didn't need to bother anyone. I'd made it to the bathroom alone the day before, hadn't I? The hallway was quiet as I inched my way from the guest room. I gripped the walker with one hand, and with the other, I reached for the edge of the hallway table for support. That was my mistake. The leg of the table wobbled. I lost my balance. In one terrifying blink, my left knee buckled, and I fell hard against the doorframe. Not to the floor, thank God, but hard enough that I bit my lip from the jolt, and the healing incision on my hip screamed in red-hot protest. I gasped. I froze there, half draped against the frame of the bathroom, one hand still gripping the edge of the table like a lifeline. I could feel warmth through the side of my hospital gown. I didn't need a mirror to know the wound had started to bleed again. Still, I didn't call for help. I waited. I breathed. I pressed my palm to the wall, stabilized myself, and slowly, carefully, lowered onto the toilet. Everything in my body throbbed, but I clenched my jaw and forced myself to hold steady. By the time I emerged 5 minutes later, Claire was standing in the hallway, holding her phone and glancing at her watch. She wasn't dressed yet for work, but her tone was already in office mode. "What happened?" she asked, narrowing her eyes at the red smear on my gown. "I slipped a bit," I said. "Just needed the wall for balance." She sighed, exasperated. "We have a meeting downtown at 9. I told you yesterday not to try walking without someone here." I opened my mouth to explain, then closed it. Claire wasn't finished. "If you hadn't tried to do it all by yourself," she snapped, "we could have been on time. Owen's supposed to lead the presentation." Her words hung in the air, heavier than my steps. There it was. Not, "Are you hurt?" Not, "Let's check the wound." Not even, "Do you want to sit?" Just frustration. Just schedules. Just the inconvenience I had become. I looked at her then. Not as my daughter-in-law. Not even as family. But as a stranger I once imagined would care. "I'm sorry," I whispered. But inside, something cracked. I had helped hundreds of patients walk again after hip surgery. I'd lifted them, bathed them, cleaned them when they couldn't move. I'd sat by them when they cried from shame. And I had never, not once, made them feel like a burden. Now here I was, 69 years old, wearing a bloody gown in my own son's hallway, being spoken to like a child who had ruined a field trip. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my life helping others heal, yet no one here was helping me be whole again. Claire turned away. "I'll grab gauze," she muttered. "But please, don't move until someone's with you." I nodded again, silently, and leaned into the wall for balance. Not for support, not anymore, just to stay upright. Owen came down 10 minutes later. Claire must have told him what happened because he gave me a once-over, then said, "Mom, you've got to let us help you the way we know how. Things are different now." I didn't answer, because what I wanted to say was, different how? That I used to be seen? That I used to matter? That I used to be a nurse, not a liability? But I said nothing. Because I was tired. Because it was still bleeding. Because I was starting to realize that being allowed to stay in someone's house didn't mean you were welcome in their heart. Later that night, as I changed into clean pajamas, I saw the dried blood on the edge of the gown I'd worn that morning. I didn't throw it out. I folded it neatly, placed it in the bottom drawer. Not as a keepsake, as a reminder that there was a line, and I had just found it. Before I left the hospital, I asked Nurse Helen to help me pack the small cedar box at the foot of my bed. It wasn't large, about the size of a sewing kit, but it was heavy with time. Inside were only a few things. A photograph of Owen on his wedding day. In a gray suit I had hemmed the sleeves of myself. A birthday card he'd made in second grade with wobbly hearts drawn in red marker. A crocheted blue bonnet I made when he was born. A few ticket stubs from a high school play where he played a silent tree. But to me, he was the whole forest. I didn't bring clothes. I didn't bring valuables. I brought memories. The kind you hope might anchor something, might make someone stop, smile. Remember. I carried the box on my lap in the car ride from the hospital, fingers resting on the brass latch like it was sacred. That first afternoon, as Claire flitted about straightening throw pillows and vacuuming rugs, I asked gently, "Is it all right if I leave this in the living room?" She glanced over her shoulder. "That box?" "Yes," I said. "It's just keepsakes, for Owen, for, well, all of us." Claire nodded, too fast, the way people do when they're saying yes to avoid saying no. So I set it on the coffee table. Not in the way, not taking up space, just sitting quietly, like me. That evening, I watched Owen come down the stairs, briefcase in hand, and glance at the box. His eyes lingered for half a second. Then he looked away. He didn't ask what was inside. The next morning, I shuffled out from the guest room, still sore from my incision, and saw the box was gone. Not moved. Gone. I panicked a little, checked under the coffee table, then spotted it, tucked behind the hallway cabinet, half hidden behind a stack of mail and a scented candle shaped like a pine cone. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the pine cone candle. It wasn't even lit. That night, Claire served dinner in silence. Quinoa and cold chicken. As she cleared the plates, I gathered the courage. I noticed the memory box was moved. I said softly. Claire didn't pause. She scraped a plate into the bin and replied, "It just didn't really go with the decor." Her tone was breezy, dismissive, like I had set a shoe on the table. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I wasn't going to fight about a box. But that night, as I lay in bed, I wondered, had I become like the box? Out of place? Inconvenient? Something they loved once, but no longer had space for in the room? The next day, I heard them arguing upstairs. Not yelling. Claire never yelled. But sharp whispers, pointed tones that leaked through the vents. "She needs more than we can give," Claire said. "It's not sustainable. She's just healing." Owen replied, quieter. "It's only temporary." Claire's voice again. "It's always something with her. She brings things, expects things. Like I don't know, her staff." That one stung. Staff? I had made my own breakfast that morning with one arm leaning on the counter. I hadn't asked Claire for help tying my shoes. I hadn't even mentioned the bloodstains still lingering in the hallway from my slip. And yet, in her mind, I was asking too much. That evening, I returned the box to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The birthday card was still there. "To the best mommy. Love, Owen, age 7. I smiled. Then I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the slow, quiet kind of crying that comes from realizing you brought a part of yourself, hoping someone would say, "I remember." And instead they say, "That doesn't match the furniture." Some people would argue, she's their mother, not their responsibility. They're young, building careers, building lives. She should be in rehab. Mothers need to know when to let go. And maybe that's true. But I didn't ask to stay forever. I didn't ask for flowers or parades. I brought a box of love. And even that was too much. That's when I began to understand. Sometimes it isn't about the help you ask for. It's about how uncomfortable your presence makes people when they've already decided you no longer belong in their story. No one ever opened the box. Not once. But one day, they would wish they had. There's a certain tone Claire uses, not cruel, not even loud, but clipped, precise. Like a woman announcing the boarding time for a flight you've already missed. She doesn't tell you what to do. She simply tells the room what's happening. And somehow, what she says always becomes what is. It started small. Dinner plans. She's on a low-sodium diet now, so no need for the turkey gravy. Then birthday gifts. Owen and I decided not to do a big celebration this year. Just a quiet evening. No guests. Then holidays. We figured it'd be easier if we just stayed at our place for Christmas. Less driving around. And Owen, my Owen, would nod, sometimes even smile, as if these were his own ideas. But I could see it. That brief pause. That half second when he would glance my way before Claire's eyes cut to him like twin razors. I never questioned it. Never asked, "Is that truly what you want, Owen?" Because I was raised to be agreeable. Raised to believe that good mothers didn't stir conflict. They smoothed it over. So I smiled. I adapted. When Claire picked out the curtains for the lake house without asking, I stayed silent. When she decided Owen should donate my late husband's tools, no one's using them. It's just clutter. I bit my tongue. When they moved to a house 10 miles farther and never gave me the new address until weeks later, I convinced myself they simply forgot. They hadn't. But denial is a warm place to rest when the truth feels too cold. I remember once, about a year ago, sitting across from them at brunch. Claire mentioned they were thinking of getting a dog. Before I could even open my mouth, she added, "Don't worry, Catherine. It'll be a hypoallergenic breed. No shedding. We know how sensitive you are." I blinked. I hadn't said anything. She had preemptively dismissed me. I realized then I didn't need to be told no anymore. I was simply never asked in the first place. It's a strange kind of erasure. Not loud, not cruel, but steady, like rain slowly warping the wood of a front porch, until one day you fall right through. I'd become someone to be managed, not included, a fragile item on a shelf they dusted when guests came over. And Owen, he would sometimes squeeze my hand at the door, say things like, "Thanks for being so understanding, Mom." But he never once asked, "How do you feel about this?" Claire had a way of folding him into her logic, of making her decisions sound like they came from both of them, even when they didn't. She and I talked, and we think it's better if we skip Thanksgiving this year. Just need some quiet time. Claire and I agreed you probably wouldn't want to travel in this weather. Claire thinks the rehab center might actually be a better fit. They have nurses there. We're just trying to do what's best. That word. It used to mean Owen and me. Now, it was Claire's royal pronoun, a crown she wore with precision. I don't hate her. That's the thing. Claire is organized, sharp, efficient. She handles everything, from finances to furniture deliveries, with a grace that would impress a CEO. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being someone she wanted to include. I became someone she needed to contain, and I let it happen. Because every time I wanted to push back, I thought, if I say something, Owen will be caught in the middle. If I disagree, I'll be seen as difficult. If I cause waves, I might lose even this small seat at the table. So I stayed silent. I stepped aside. I gave way. But silence is a debt that compounds. And now, lying in this guest bed with my body stitched together and dignity unraveling one thread at a time, I can't help but ask, how many times did I shrink myself to keep the family whole, only to find I'd disappeared? I thought endurance was love. I thought flexibility would earn me closeness. I thought if I kept the peace long enough, eventually I'd be welcomed in. Not as an obligation, but as a person who mattered. But love that only exists when you're quiet isn't love. And peace that comes at the cost of yourself isn't peace. I once believed that if I just gave a little more, I could hold the family together. But I never asked, who was holding me? Owen once told me he wanted to be a doctor. He was 10, his voice still soft around the edges, still clumsy with certainty. He had drawn a lopsided heart with red and blue veins shooting out like fireworks and taped it to the fridge. "I'm gonna save lives like you, Mom," he said proudly. "Only I won't faint when I see blood." I remember I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the dish I was drying. He had caught me once, years before, sitting in the break room at the hospital with my head between my knees after a gruesome trauma case. I hadn't known he'd remembered. That night. After he went to sleep, I stayed up folding laundry and thinking about how bright he was, how much fire he had, how the world hadn't dulled him yet. He was a curious child, not just smart, hungry to know. He read anatomy books for fun, snuck into my medical journals when he thought I wasn't looking. He once asked if he could shadow me at work, and when I said no, he shadowed me at home instead, watching how I cleaned a cut, how I wrapped a sprained wrist, how I calmed patients over the phone. So I saved every penny I could. I skipped lunches at the cafeteria, brought oatmeal in a thermos every day for a month. And finally, I bought him that plastic anatomical skeleton model he'd circled in a magazine. $89.95 plus shipping. It was the first package he ever tracked, every day after school. When it arrived, he opened it on the kitchen floor, laid out every limb like a sacred puzzle. He named it Harold, Harold the skeleton. He studied with Harold every night. He learned the bones faster than I expected. One night, he corrected me on the difference between the ulna and the radius. I didn't even mind. I hoped, that one day he'd wear the white coat I never got to wear full time, that he'd walk across the graduation stage with me in the audience, holding back tears, that he'd become someone who didn't just want to help, but did. And for a while, it seemed that way. He got into pre-med. He had the grades, the charm, the drive. Then Claire entered his life. She wasn't cruel, not then, just polished, efficient. The kind of person who asks you how you are, then doesn't wait for the answer. Owen softened around her. He deferred more, questioned less. Slowly, Harold moved from his desk to the closet. Then the books stopped arriving. Then the lab coat disappeared from the back of his door. I asked once, gently, "What happened to medicine?" He shrugged. "Claire thinks law school makes more sense. Less messy." Then he kissed my cheek and changed the subject. I didn't push. I told myself, he's a man now. Let him choose. But it wasn't his voice I kept hearing when decisions were made. It was hers. And now, as I lie here recovering in a house that isn't truly mine, surrounded by schedules I didn't approve and silences I didn't cause, I ask myself, when did my son forget he wanted to heal people? And how did he become someone who watched his wife treat his own mother like an inconvenience and said nothing? He wasn't raised like this. I didn't raise him like this. There was a time when Owen couldn't stand to see me tired. He'd pour me juice after my night shifts, rub lotion on my cracked hands. Once, when I had the flu, he made toast so burnt the smoke alarm went off, but he was so proud. He said, "You always take care of people. Let me do it for once." That boy? He's gone. Or maybe not gone, just buried. Buried under polite compliance, under the weight of a marriage where silence keeps the peace and complicity keeps the calendar clear. Sometimes I still look at him and search for traces, a glance, a sigh, a wince. Some hint that the boy who named a skeleton Harold and wanted to save lives is still in there, that he knows this. This is not the mother he dreamed of honoring. But all I find is distance, a measured tone, a son who refers to his own mother in the third person when explaining to Claire, "She's fine, don't worry about it." I once believed that if you poured enough love into someone, they'd always carry it, that it would stick, anchor them, protect them from forgetting where they came from. But sometimes, love is like the bones in Harold's plastic frame, disassembled, packed away, still whole, somewhere, but unused. And I wonder, if I could reach the child version of Owen now, would he be proud of the man he became? Or would he too ask, "When did we start leaving Mom behind?" The knock on the door wasn't loud. Just 2 short raps. Firm, measured, like everything Jonathan ever did. He stepped inside carrying a black leather briefcase and the kind of silence that only lawyers bring. Professional, restrained, necessary. He nodded toward me, not warmly, but respectfully. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "we'll make this as efficient as possible." He sat at the dining table, the same table Claire had once declared too bulky for modern taste. The same table they now used to place delivery containers instead of real meals. Jonathan unlatched the case. The click of the metal locks echoed far too loud in that quiet room. It made me flinch. He laid out the documents one by one, smoothing the edges with his palm like he was preparing surgical tools. The language was precise. Asset protection, power of attorney reversal, temporary housing terms, escrow reallocation. Each page felt colder than the last. He spoke as he worked. In the event of full recovery, we proceed to Part B. Otherwise, your legal interests remain intact. Click. Flip. Sign here. Your primary residence is no longer jointly accessible. This will ensure control returns fully to your name by Wednesday. Click. Initial here. I watched his pen move like a scalpel, clean, sharp, no emotion. And yet, I felt everything. My hands trembled as I reached for the first page. It wasn't from fear, not exactly. It was the weight of doing something for myself. For once, for decades, every form I'd ever signed had been for others. Consent forms for Owen's school, medical waivers for patients, loan applications with Thomas's name on top, grocery store memberships with Claire's preferences. Even the check I wrote for their wedding had her name listed first. But this document didn't list Owen. It didn't list Claire. There were no, for the sake of family clauses. No language about shared decisions. It was just me, my name, my rights, my choice. Jonathan paused when he saw me hesitate. His eyes met mine, not unkindly. You don't have to rush, he said. But you called me for a reason. I nodded slowly. Yes, I had called. I had picked up that phone after Claire slammed the dishwasher shut, and Owen muttered something about needing space. I had called after spending 6 nights replaying my son's silence and his wife's contempt. I had called the moment I realized the love I'd poured into them had become permission for them to forget I existed. So now I picked up the pen. The ink moved like a whisper. I signed my name with careful strokes. Catherine Holloway, not just a mother or a nurse or someone's background character, a person, a woman, a life of her own. Page 1, then 2. I pressed harder on the third, as if imprinting it into more than just paper. By the 4th, my signature no longer shook. Jonathan continued. There's also a transfer order for the funds you mentioned. It will bypass the joint account and route directly to your secured trust. He slid the paper across the table. Once you sign this, no one can touch it but you. I stared at the figure. The numbers blurred for a moment. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. That money? It was meant for their future, their baby, their dreams. But where was I in that future? Who had made room for my dreams? Who had asked me if I wanted to stay or go or breathe on my own? I signed. When it was done, Jonathan stacked the papers neatly and placed them back into his case. Delivery is scheduled for tomorrow morning, he said. They'll have 48 hours to respond to the eviction notice. He said it plainly, like it was weather, and maybe it was, a storm that had been building for years. But this time, I wasn't standing in the rain without an umbrella. I walked him to the door. He paused just before leaving. I've worked with a lot of families, Mrs. Holloway, he said. Most people wait too long to protect themselves. You didn't. When the door closed, I stood still for a long time. The silence felt different now. Not lonely, just mine. I looked at the pen still on the table, felt its weight in my hand. For the first time in 40 years, I whispered to no one. I signed something for me. June didn't say anything when I showed up at her door with just a tote bag and a folded envelope. She didn't ask what happened, didn't press for explanations. She simply stepped aside, letting me in with that same calm presence I'd always admired in her, like a harbor that never needed to shout to prove it was safe. Her apartment was warm, Not in the way of thermostats or candles, but in the way of being lived in gently. Books with frayed edges, a knitted throw over the couch, faint piano music humming from the old speakers near the window. She took my bag without a word and motioned toward the armchair. I sat down slowly, my legs still heavy, body still aching. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with a tray. 2 cups of tea, a wooden plate with lemon biscuits, and 1 delicate porcelain teacup with a long, thin crack running from the rim to the base. I blinked at it. It was the same cup she'd kept for years, the one I'd once offered to throw out when helping her pack boxes. "You kept this?" I asked. June gave a quiet smile as she placed it on the tray. "Of course. Just because something's been cracked doesn't mean it's lost its worth. You clean it. You use it gently. It's still part of the set." She sat across from me, pulled the knitted throw over both our laps, and pressed play on a soft playlist. Ella Fitzgerald, drifting like a lullaby through the space. Still, she didn't ask anything. She just let me be. It wasn't until the second cup of tea that she finally spoke, eyes watching the steam rise from her cup. "I lived with my daughter for 5 years, you know." I turned toward her slowly. I hadn't known. "I moved in after Richard passed," she continued. "Thought it'd be temporary. Just until I figured things out." She paused. 5 years later, I was still there, making myself smaller, telling myself I didn't mind the little things. She took a sip. Her voice didn't tremble, but it had that softness, the kind that comes after grief has already burned through all the loud. It wasn't one moment that broke me. It was the slow erosion, the way she'd speak over me during dinner, the way her husband would roll his eyes when I asked for the TV remote, the way I'd be the last one to find out they were hosting guests. I swallowed. "They never told me to leave," June added, "but they didn't have to. They just stopped making space." She looked at me then, gently but directly. "I don't blame them. I blame me. I stayed too long. I kept thinking if I just held on, they'd remember who I was to them." She set her cup down carefully. "But love without boundaries turns into permission. And when people think you'll never leave, they stop trying to make you want to stay." I didn't realize I was crying until I felt her hand wrap around mine. It was warm, steady, the kind of hand that knew how to hold silence like a gift instead of a burden. "I thought I was doing what mothers do," I whispered, staying, being useful, forgiving. June nodded. "We all do, until we don't." She stood, went to the kitchen again, and came back with a small dish towel. She gently wiped the tear from my cheek like I was a child. Then, she picked up the cracked teacup and held it to the light. "You know why I kept this one?" I shook my head. "Because it reminds me that healing isn't always about fixing things. Sometimes it's about honoring them. This little crack?" She traced it with her finger. "It's where the light gets in." We didn't speak for a while after that, just sat, listening to the music, the quiet clink of cups, the soft tick of the clock in the hallway. I looked around, at her home again. Not grand, not expensive, but hers. Every object had a story. Every corner had care. And somehow, I realized, this was the first place in months where I didn't feel like I had to prove I deserved to exist. No expectations, no judgment, no schedule of medications taped to the fridge. Just me, June, and the cracked teacup between us, whole in its own way. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself lean back, close my eyes, and breathe. It came in at 6:12 a.m. I was sitting at June's tiny kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of warm oatmeal tea, staring out her window as dawn filtered through the blinds in soft gray stripes. My phone buzzed once, then again. Claire, this is how you repay us? You were here 1 week. 1 week, and you've already torn this family apart. The words cut clean, precise, like a scalpel. I sat still for a long while, reading and rereading it. There was no greeting, no concern, no, "How are you feeling?" Just blame. A cold verdict typed in clean font. Not a single question. As if my presence had been a kind of toxin. As if all the years I spent stitching this family together could be unraveled in 7 days by merely existing. June was still asleep. Her place was silent, but kind, like a sanctuary that didn't rush you into reaction. So I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, the second message came. Owen, "Mom, I need to talk." That was all. No punctuation. No, "Hi." No, "I'm sorry." Just a 4-word summons, like I was still on call. Still wearing my nurse badge. Still expected to show up, no matter what had just happened. I stared at his name glowing on the screen, waiting, foolishly, perhaps, for a second message. Maybe something like, "I'm sorry Claire spoke that way," or even just, "Are you okay?" But nothing followed, just those 4 words, static, cold, empty of acknowledgement. And that was when I finally understood something I had refused to face for years. I had trained them this way. I had taught them that I would always pick up, always fix, always fold myself in half to smooth out their lives. Even in that hospital bed, stitched up and trembling, I had still tried to make things easier for them. I had given Owen everything, my strength, my body, my silence. And now, I was supposed to feel guilty for finally saying no? No, I didn't reply. I let the message sit there, unread, not as punishment, but as proof. Proof that I could, at long last, choose myself without explanation. Because silence is not aggression. Silence is not manipulation. Silence is not cruel. Sometimes, silence is simply the last place left to stand when every word you've spoken has been turned against you. I closed my eyes and whispered to no one, "I'm not disappearing. I'm protecting what's left." The part of me that still ached when I remembered little Owen at 10 years old, holding up a toy stethoscope and saying, "I want to help people like you, Mom." The part of me that still wanted to believe he was in there somewhere. But I wasn't going to dig anymore. For so long, I'd told myself that love meant holding on tighter. But real love, the kind that heals instead of binds, sometimes means letting go. I set my phone face down on the table and sipped my tea. June stirred from the other room, her feet padding softly toward me. She glanced at the phone, then at my face. Didn't ask a thing. Just opened the cupboard, pulled down 2 bowls, and started making breakfast. It was such a simple thing, but it grounded me. For once, I wasn't living inside someone else's emergency. I wasn't being guilt-tripped back into submission. I wasn't negotiating my own worth. I was here, in this room, in this moment. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of being called selfish, because I finally understood. It's not selfish to stop bleeding for people who treat your wounds like inconveniences. That morning, I didn't answer either text. I didn't justify. I didn't defend. I just sat there whole, quiet, still. Not to punish them, but to protect the woman who was finally learning that love, real love, starts within. The letter came folded into thirds, tucked inside a pale pink envelope with no return address. Only my name, Catherine Holloway, handwritten in the same looping script I hadn't seen in over a decade. At first, I didn't recognize it. It had arrived among the usual stack: ads, a coupon flyer, a utility bill I no longer had to worry about. But this letter, light as a breath, stopped me cold. I brought it inside and placed it on the table beside my tea. June glanced at it, then at me, raising an eyebrow. I shook my head, unsure. No idea. It wasn't until I saw the closing salutation that I remembered. Ella. She had been just 23 when she joined the ward. A new nurse, fresh out of school, all nerves and sharp elbows. I'd seen something in her, a fragility she tried too hard to hide. Ella wasn't just green. She was drowning quietly, behind a smile. One night, long after visiting hours, I'd found her in the medication room, sitting on the floor, back against the wall, hands shaking. "I can't do this," she had whispered, tears streaming. "I'm not like you. I'm not strong like you." I didn't lecture, didn't offer cliches. I just sat beside her, let her cry. Then I pulled out a mini pack of crackers I kept in my coat pocket and said, "If you're gonna have a breakdown, you better at least eat something salty with it." We laughed. It was small, but something shifted in her after that. Ella stayed, grew, became one of the best nurses I'd ever worked with. She even started training new hires, called me her ward mother. We lost touch after I retired, and now, this letter. I opened it slowly, smoothing the creases. Her words poured out in blue ink, written like a conversation we'd never gotten to finish. "Dear Catherine, it's been over 10 years, but not a week has gone by without me thinking about you. I heard through someone at the hospital that you had surgery recently. I don't know where you are now or who's taking care of you. But I hope, God, I hope you're being loved the way you loved others. You probably don't even remember all the things you did for me. But I remember everything. I remember the night you sat on the floor beside me when I wanted to quit, and probably worse. You were the only person who didn't try to fix me with advice. You just stayed. That moment changed everything. You helped me stay alive, Catherine. I don't know how to say thank you for that. So I'll just say this." I paused. My throat thickened. I could already feel the end of the letter approaching, and yet I wasn't ready for it. "Now it's your turn. Please, don't save anyone else. Save yourself. With all my love, Ella." That's when I broke. The tears came before I could stop them. Not loud, not gasping, just slow, full, steady. They ran down my cheeks and landed on the paper like tiny echoes, because Ella didn't know what I'd just been through. Didn't know that. A week ago, I was still convincing myself that Owen's silence was my fault, that Claire's cruelty was my burden, that walking away meant failure. She didn't know that I had signed documents that morning severing my home from theirs, that I'd stayed up the night before rereading old voicemails, hoping to find one kind word I had missed. And yet somehow, her words landed exactly where I needed them. It was as if the universe, in its quiet mercy, had sent me a hand to hold through the fog. I folded the letter slowly, carefully, like it was sacred. Then I placed it inside the little wooden keepsake box June had given me to keep things that matter. Next to it, I laid one of my old nurse ID badges. And then, without thinking too much, I whispered, "Thank you, Ella. I think I'm finally going to try." Not for revenge, not for validation, not even for closure, but for the woman who once sat beside a broken girl on a cold hospital floor. Because kindness didn't need a reason. That woman deserved to be saved too. The first time I wrote my will, Owen was still in college. He had just passed his MCATS, And Claire was still that sweet girl who used to call me Mrs. Holloway with a nervous smile. I remember sitting with the lawyer, pen in hand, proud of how the future looked. My only son would carry our family's values forward: kindness, compassion, sacrifice. Back then, I gave him everything, every cent, every share, every ounce of security I had saved across 40 years of double shifts, missed meals, and patched uniforms. It made sense then. But now, the future looked different, and so did I. It was a Thursday morning when I met with Jonathan again. He arrived right on time, as always, briefcase in one hand and a stack of revised papers in the other. We sat at the kitchen table in June's warm little sunroom, the scent of lemon tea drifting through the air. He didn't ask what happened. Didn't need to. He simply opened the folder and slid the new draft toward me. "You're sure about this?" he asked gently, eyes scanning mine. "Once we file it, it becomes legally binding." I nodded. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the pen. But my heart? My heart was steady for the first time in years. The first clause was simple. 50% of my total estate shall be directed to the Catherine Holloway Foundation for Nursing Education, with the mission to fund scholarships for young women pursuing nursing degrees in underserved communities. It felt right, not dramatic, not vengeful, just right. Nursing had saved me. It gave me purpose, stability, dignity. And even when my own family made me feel invisible, the hospital halls had reminded me that I mattered. Let someone else's daughter feel that too. The next clause made my eyes blur for a moment. 10% of my estate shall be granted to Ms. Ella Ramirez, RN, currently practicing in Washington State. This gift is given in faith, with gratitude, and in recognition of her compassion and resilience, so she may continue to light the path for others. I smiled through the sting in my chest. Ella had no idea I was doing this. She'd never asked for anything, but that was precisely why she deserved it. She reminded me of the part of myself I thought I had lost, the younger Catherine, who held bleeding hands and whispered, "You're not alone." I imagined her receiving the letter from my lawyer one day. The way her hands might shake, the way she might sit down slowly, stunned. Maybe she'd think back to the night on the medroom floor, and maybe she'd understand then that the circle had closed. And finally, there it was, the last clause, the one that made the air feel heavier. Not angry, just final. As of the date filed, Owen Holloway and Claire Holloway are no longer listed as beneficiaries in this will. No explanation, no flourish, just silence. Cold, clean, legal silence. Jonathan hesitated before moving on. He looked at me again. "I can add a statement if you'd like, something to explain." I raised a hand gently. "Number." "The absence says enough." He nodded, then pointed to the signature line. It was a short walk from pen to paper. But that signature, it carried 40 years. 40 years of standing behind others. Of speaking softly to avoid tension. Of hoping silence could keep a family from cracking. Of believing that being good meant being invisible. I pressed the tip of the pen down. My name flowed across the line with a steadiness I didn't know I still had. And in that moment, I whispered to myself, for the first time in 40 years, I'm signing something. Just for me. Jonathan gathered the pages. His voice was low, almost reverent. "I'll file it first thing tomorrow, and I'll send you a notarized copy for your records." I nodded. "Thank you, Jonathan, for being part of this transition." He smiled gently. It's more than a transition, Catherine. It's a reclamation. After he left, I sat in silence for a while. The sun had shifted in the sky, spilling gold across the kitchen tiles. There were no loud victories, no applause, no audience, but I had quietly rewritten the story. Not with fire, not with revenge, just with clarity. And that, I thought, was a power no one could take from me. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon at the rehab center, the kind of afternoon where you can hear the wind stir the trees outside, where the air smells faintly of eucalyptus and warm chamomile. I had just finished a mindfulness session and was settling into the window seat of my room, a blanket over my knees, when I saw her, Claire. She stepped out of a silver SUV like she owned the building. Her heels clicked too loudly against the concrete. She was wearing that beige trench coat she always pulled out when she wanted to look composed. But her movements betrayed her. Stiff, frantic, brittle. I didn't move, didn't wave, just watched through the blinds. Within seconds, I heard the front desk phone ring, then footsteps echo down the hall. A young staff member knocked softly. "Mrs. Holloway," she said gently, "there's a visitor asking to speak with you." I looked at her for a moment. "Who?" She said her name is Claire. I turned my gaze back out the window. "Tell her I'm not receiving visitors today." The girl hesitated, then nodded and left quietly. From my room, I couldn't hear the exact words, but I saw Claire's face shift. Shock first, then disbelief, then something darker. Her lips moved in rapid bursts. Her arms gestured wildly. And then, the yelling began. "You think you can hide here, Catherine?" Her voice rang out over the parking lot like a siren. Sharp, angry, piercing the gentle peace of the place like a stone through glass. I saw one of the nurses come out and gently say something to her. Claire snapped back loud enough that I could make out fragments. "Mother-in-law or not, she can't ignore me forever. We took care of her. We opened our home." The door shut again. A moment passed. Then another. And then, "You can't just erase us, Mother. You can't choose to unmother your own son." Her voice cracked. "You can't choose not to love us." I still didn't move. She couldn't see me from where I sat. But I saw everything. Her chest heaving, her mascara beginning to smudge, her hands clenched like fists that couldn't find anything to punch but air. A different staff member, a tall young man this time, walked out and spoke firmly but calmly. "Ma'am, we've already told you. She's not accepting guests today. We'll have to ask you to leave the premises." Claire glared at him like he was a fly she wanted to squash. "I'm not just some stranger," she spat. "I'm family." He didn't flinch. She's still allowed to set boundaries. Claire stood there frozen, like the word boundaries had never been spoken to her before. Like it was a foreign language, she suddenly realized the whole world had been speaking behind her back. Then she shouted one last thing. "Mother, you can't deny us forever. You can't shut the door and pretend we don't exist." And then silence. The kind that comes not after resolution, but after something cracks. I heard the car door slam, the tires peel slightly on the gravel, and just like that, she was gone. I stayed by the window for a while longer. Not to gloat, not to replay her words, but to breathe, to feel what it was like, to not open the door, because for decades I always had, even when they blamed me, even when they gaslit me, even when they offered silence instead of gratitude. I always opened, always tried, always stayed just long enough to prove I still loved them, even if they made me feel invisible. But today I didn't open that door. And that was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. I whispered to myself, not with anger, but with clarity. I'm not denying you, Claire. I'm just no longer permitting you. There is a difference. Denying means rejecting your existence. Withholding permission means reclaiming mine. And perhaps, for the first time, she finally felt what it meant to be on the other side of a boundary, not drawn in sand, but in steel. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her harm. But I would no longer hand her the key to rooms in me she had repeatedly trashed. That wasn't revenge. That was adulthood. That was healing. And as the breeze rustled through the leaves outside, and the rehab nurse brought me another cup of tea, I finally felt it. Not power, but peace. The phone rang at 8:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was reading a book by the window, sipping on lukewarm tea, when the ringtone, that specific ringtone I hadn't changed, cut through the quiet. It was Owen. I stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds. The name felt foreign now, not because I didn't recognize it, but because it no longer pulled at me the same way. It didn't tighten my chest. It didn't make me hope. It just rang. Still, I answered, because closure deserves a door, even if it doesn't stay open. Hello? My voice came out even, not cold, just resolved. There was a pause on the other end, and then a breath. Then another. And then the cracking sound of a grown man trying not to break. Mom. His voice trembled. I don't know where to start. Silence from me. I had learned that rushing in to soothe was no longer my job. I heard you change the will, he said quietly. Claire told me. Still, I said nothing. Let him walk this road himself. Then the words spilled out all at once, messy, raw, like a dam finally breached. Mom, I know I wasn't there the way I should have been. I know I hurt you. I know Claire. She said things she shouldn't have. But you're still my mother. You raised me. You gave everything for me. I miss you. I miss your voice, the way you always knew what to do, even when I didn't say anything. My throat tightened, but I stayed silent. Please, he said, now audibly crying. You can hate us if you need to, but please don't cut me out of your life. Please don't erase me. I'm still your son. His voice cracked. I still love you, Mom. I closed my eyes, and then I answered, softly, calmly, but clearly. Owen, you're not being erased. You walked out of my life a long time ago. This isn't about me cutting you out. This is about you turning away. The moment I was on the floor, crawling, and you stood by and let her scream at me. Silence. Just his breathing on the other end. You say I raised you, I continued. Yes, I did. I raised you to be strong, to be kind. But somewhere along the way, you chose comfort over courage. You watched your wife treat me like a burden. You let her mock my body, my pain, my presence in my own home. And you didn't say a word. I paused. Let the weight of that truth hang between us. I begged you with my eyes, Owen. I pleaded in silence, and you turned away. He tried to speak, but I gently stopped him. I'm not angry anymore, I said. I'm tired. I'm tired of always being the one who crawls back, of always being the glue. Another pause. Then I added, with the gentleness only a mother can give, but I still love you. A sob broke on the other end. I just won't be the one to fix this, I said. Not this time. If you want to come back into my life, you'll have to walk toward it. With your feet, with your choices, with actions, not apologies. He whispered, How do I do that? I answered honestly. You start by showing up without expectation, without trying to rewrite the past, without asking me to bleed so you can feel whole again. A long silence followed. Then he said, almost inaudibly, I don't know if I can. I didn't rescue him from that truth. Instead, I simply said, then that's where we are, Owen. Not cruel, not shutting him out, just placing the weight of reconciliation where it belonged. Not in my hands, but in his. I'm at peace, I told him, and peace is a door I won't open for guilt. He cried again. And this time, I let him. Not because I enjoyed it, but because maybe for once, he needed to sit with the pain he helped cause. We said goodbye. He said, I hope this isn't the end. I replied, it's not the end. It's just no longer on my shoulders. When I hung up, I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt real. For the first time in decades, I wasn't holding the family together by bleeding quietly. I was holding myself. And as I looked out the window again, same spot, same chair, I whispered, I'm not the healer anymore. If they want to come close again, they'll have to learn how to walk toward me. I've walked far enough. I stood in front of the hospital doors, hands tucked into the sleeves of a soft cardigan Ella had once gifted me. The same entrance I'd passed through hundreds, maybe thousands of times before. But today was different. I wasn't here as a nurse. Not as the woman hunched over double shifts, skipping meals, swallowing grief with professionalism. Not as the backbone who quietly caught every falling piece in the ER. Today, I was here as Catherine Holloway, patient recovery consultant, retired nurse, widowed woman, and something I had never let myself fully be before, a whole person. The automatic doors hissed open with that familiar hydraulic sigh. Same polished tiles, same antiseptic scent, same bright white lights that had always felt more interrogative than illuminating. But I moved through them differently now. No weight on my shoulders, no clipboard, no silent scream in my spine. I walked slowly through the main corridor, nodding at the few nurses who looked up. A couple seemed to do a double take. One even whispered to another, probably trying to confirm whether the old Holloway had really returned. I didn't stop to explain. I didn't owe anyone that. At the nurses' station on 3 West, I paused. The same station I had anchored for years. I used to arrive at 5:45 a.m. sharp, set up the med cart, review notes, anticipate chaos before it even started. I knew who would try to fake their vitals, who would cry at 2 a.m., who needed an extra ginger ale without asking. But today, I was just observing, just listening, just being. Then I felt it, a presence beside me, timid, respectful. I turned to find a young nurse, couldn't have been more than 24, with nervous eyes and a nervous clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. She blinked twice before whispering, "Excuse me, ma'am? Are you Catherine Holloway?" I gave a soft nod. Her face lit up, awe blooming like sunrise. I'm sorry," she stammered. "It's just, Ella talks about you all the time. She says you're the reason she became more than just a nurse. That you saved her life. That you're a legend." The word sat in the air. Legend. It almost made me laugh, because not too long ago, another girl, my own daughter-in-law, called me something entirely different. Deadweight. Nuisance. Too old to help. My eyes softened as I looked at the young nurse. She reminded me of Ella when she first started. Heart on sleeve, questions in every breath, still unsure whether compassion would survive the bureaucracy. "Tell Ella I said thank you," I said gently. "She's here," the nurse said, beaming. "She's on a different floor now, but she made sure we all knew you were coming back. Said we'd be lucky to work alongside you, even for a minute." I smiled, not out of pride, but out of something quieter. Peace. I made my way to the consultation room. It was simple. 2 chairs, a circular table, and a big window that actually let the sun in. My new post. I wasn't here to run IVs or prep for codes. I was here to sit across from patients and tell them, "I've been where you are. You're not alone. You're not broken." To offer presence, not just solutions. That afternoon, as I reviewed a new intake file, I caught my reflection in the glass of the window. Not the hospital-grade mirror from before, but a softer one, framed by light and time. Hair grayer than when I'd left, lines deeper, but eyes clearer. And I whispered, not to the glass, but to the woman inside it. "Some call me a legend. Some call me a burden. But only I get to decide who I am." There was no applause, no parade, no son or daughter waiting outside to say, "I'm proud of you, Mom." Just me. But this time, that was enough. I had stepped back into the place where I had once given too much, and now I gave only what I chose. No more, no less. And somehow, in that, I was more alive than ever. It was late afternoon when I stepped out onto June's little balcony. The light had that soft golden slant it only gets near the end of the day, when time doesn't feel so urgent, when the world sighs instead of spins. The trees in her courtyard swayed gently, their leaves rustling like a lullaby meant for grown women who had carried too much for too long. I had my shawl draped over my shoulders, the one with frayed edges and a faint lavender scent I couldn't name. In my hands was the same chipped teacup June always gave me. A hairline fracture ran from the rim down to the base, but it never leaked. She once told me it reminded her of me, flawed, yes, but whole. I set it down gently on the small round table beside my weathered leather-bound notebook. That notebook had traveled through years of my life. It had soaked in tears and coffee, had been opened during night shifts and sleepless dawns, had once held grocery lists. And now it held something better: silence and peace. The sliding door creaked open behind me, and I heard June's light footsteps. She didn't speak right away. She never rushed the quiet. Eventually, she lowered herself into the chair across from me. She didn't bring a teacup of her own, just herself, her presence. I picked up my cup, held it with both hands. The ceramic was warm from the tea, and the warmth seeped gently into my fingers, into the tired corners of me. June watched me for a moment, then asked in her calm, low voice, "How do you feel today?" Her question didn't press. It invited. I looked at her, at the woman who had welcomed me into her home without asking me to explain the bruises beneath my strength, at the woman who knew that sometimes healing wasn't loud. It was slow. It was small. It was still. I exhaled slowly and let the words rise, unforced. "I still haven't forgiven them," I said. I expected the air to shift, maybe tighten. It didn't. June simply nodded, and I smiled. A soft, honest smile. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. "But I've forgiven myself." The breeze lifted a strand of hair from my cheek as if to kiss the truth of those words. I felt them settle into my chest like a stone in a riverbed. No longer crashing, just resting. I took a sip of the tea. It was chamomile. Always chamomile. My eyes drifted to the yard below. A child was blowing bubbles, and a golden retriever was chasing them with absolute conviction. The world continued, indifferent to the wreckage or the rebuilding of any one person's heart. And maybe that's what made it beautiful. Maybe that's what made me free. There had been a time, not so long ago, when I believed my worth was tied to service, to endurance, to being the one who stayed when no one else would. But I had learned that boundaries weren't walls. They were doors. I finally locked behind me, and not out of hate, but out of love. For the woman who had bent and bent and bent, until she stopped, until she stood. I reached for my notebook, ran my fingers over its cover, then left it closed. No need to write anything today. Some truths didn't need to be recorded to be real. June leaned back, her gaze soft. She didn't ask for more. She didn't need to. And I didn't need to explain that healing didn't always mean mended relationships. Sometimes it simply meant choosing not to carry someone else's fracture in your own ribcage anymore. As I sat there, teacup cradled in hand, evening folding itself into night, a single thought bloomed. Perhaps I'm not their nurse, but I'm no longer their patient either. I've healed something deeper than bone.